In 2021, Larcenia Taylor's life changed when she lost her husband, James Taylor. She says he fainted at their home in southeast Bakersfield and she called the ambulance. And this wasn't her first time having to call the ambulance for her husband, but she didn't know it was going to be his last ride.
I can't take it off.
More than 2 years later, Larcenia Taylor still wears her wedding ring after being with her husband, James Taylor, for 45 years.
James was loving and kind. Everybody that talked said he was such a kind person. And where you saw me, you saw him and the kids, because we did everything together.
As she shows me photos of her husband, Taylor says to know James was to love James, and that has never changed for her since the 1970s.
And then from there, we got married in March of '78.
And we're together ever since. But April 16th, 2021, when James was 65 years old, that changed.
My husband was taken to one of the emergency rooms here in town. He had fell out. He had passed out in the front yard. So I called the ambulance.
Taylor says James was taken to the hospital, but she wasn't allowed to go at the time due to COVID. But when she called back later to check on him,
they said code blue in the emergency room about at least 6 times, code blue. And I asked the person that answered the phone, I said, I hope that's not my husband.
After her phone call, she says she went to the hospital to see what was going on.
When I got there, I was met by the chaplain and a few nurses, and they told me my husband was dead.
Taylor says the doctor told her that her husband just stopped breathing.
When he left our home, he was cognitive. He was talking, he knew where he was, and according to the medical records, he was cognitive in the hospital.
But for her, she says she couldn't wrap her head around her husband just dying suddenly, so she requested his medical records.
After I got the records, there were a lot of discrepancies to me. For example, they had introduced a new medication to my husband.
Taylor says that new medication was Zofran.
I looked it up, and it specifically said, do not give to an individual who has heart trouble.
But she says James had a history of heart complications, including a prior heart attack, prior cardiac stenting, and a defibrillator.
You can give Zofran to individuals whose heart is strong. Well, James' heart was weak. So according to their record, their own records, they gave him 4 milligrams of Zofran with the IV.
A search for Zofran on the FDA website says to avoid Zofran in patients with congestive heart failure. After learning this information, Taylor says she took the complaint to the California Department of Public Health.
They came back with a report saying that my concerns were substantiated with the complaint.
Documents from the California Department of Public Facility failed to follow policies and procedures on NA 151 standards of care, assessment and reassessment and medication reconciliation process when home medications assessment were not reviewed or documented for one of the 3 sampled patients. This failure had the potential to adversely affect patient 1's plan of care and treatment. But this doesn't change the fact her family, including her 2 children, are left heartbroken.
We were destroyed, really, because, you know, he did everything, and we did everything together. We went to church together, Disneyland together. We did everything together.
When it comes to the case of her husband and her family suing the medical facility for medical malpractice, Taylor says though she has not lost faith in every doctor, it's important to understand that things do happen.
I don't think in a negative mode. You know, you give doctors you're confident that they know what they're doing. To this day, I still think doctors know what they're doing. But we have to understand, just as any other profession, there are bad ones. There's bad teachers, there's bad professors. That's just the way it is. And doctors are not immune from not knowing their job or being negligent.
Her advice to others:
number 1, be with your loved one in the ER. Number 2, make sure that they don't introduce a new medication to your loved one that you're not aware of. And number 3, if the doctor seems to have a issue with you, document that and take it to the people that are in charge in the hospital.
Because now their family's life will never be the same.
My husband will never be back. You know, he'll never be here with us again. Just because of something that someone or corporation did.
Her heart still yearning for James 2 years later.
He is so missed. I can't describe it.
A 10-day jury trial is set for March 11th, 2024 at 9 a.m.